Hello, welcome to In the English Corner. This next video is going to discuss language awareness. That is being aware of the words that you use, the type of expressions, so basically the way you express yourself. So let's take a look together at language, how to use language effectively. Now, the language that you use in your writing is extremely important because you want to choose words that will effectively convey your message both to your reader and to your listener. You want your reader, whether you're in an academic setting, whether you're writing for business purposes or you're in a business environment, or just in a casual meeting or encounter, you want that person to be left with a lasting and positive impression of both you, your ideas, and the way you express yourself. So there are two types of English. One is called formal English, and the other one is called informal English. Now let's take a look at the differences between them. Formal English is used in business letters, academic papers, essays, public speeches, magazine articles, legal documents, journal writing, well-written newspapers, textbooks, novels, short stories, and biographies. Except sometimes in some novels or biographies, informal conversations may be recorded or included in some types of writing, but all in all, it would be using formal English in all these examples. Now, informal English is much more relaxed. And when you speak informally, it can include slang, idioms, colloquialisms, and clichés. And I have included in this video definitions of each of these terms as well as examples. So it can be used, you can use informal English for, you might say TV instead of television. You'd say the word guy. I met a guy last week when you mean boy or male. And also informal English uses contractions like don't or I'll instead of saying do not and I will. So in formal English, you don't use contractions. In formal English, you would say do not or I will. Now, that's not to say that good informal English is inferior to formal English. It's not. But what this does mean is that it depends on the occasion and the situation. So you should try to select your words and expressions to suit your meaning, to suit your audience, and the purpose of your writing. So I have divided this video into two parts. And the first part, because there is a lot to discuss, this part is going to look at the following: clichés, jargon, slang, sexist language, and offensive language. And then I'll continue in a second video with the final three: abusages, pretentious language, and overworked or ineffective words. So there's a lot to learn to help you with improving your writing, your language skills, the way you express yourself. So let's look at the first one is called clichés. Now, what is a cliché? It's an expression that's overused, and therefore when you overuse it, it lacks originality. The word cliché comes a French word cliché, which means to stereotype or to make permanent. So these phrases, they add very little to your writing, and clichés do become quite boring. They become trite. They can become repetitive. You're not using your finest language when you're using a cliché. So try to be aware of clichés and to try to use them as infrequently as possible. Now, I've included some clichés, some examples. There are many, many of them, but I've only included some of them. And I've also rewritten the cliché into more improved language. So the first one, she was as sick as a dog. Basically, it would be better to say, and what you mean is, and more descriptive, she had a high fever and she also had a sore throat. Another cliche, he came to the reception as hungry as an ox. Better to say, he came to the reception extremely hungry. To the point, clear, and your reader will be left with a better impression. Another cliche, Bill arrived at the meeting just in the nick of time. In the nick of time is a cliche. It would be better to say Bill arrived at the meeting just before it started. I like to get up bright and early every weekend. There's your cliche. It would be much clearer to say, I love to get up early on the weekends. Next, I breathed a sigh of relief after I wrote the exam is a cliche, a sigh of relief. It would be more effective to say, I felt extremely relieved after I finished writing my exam. You're too funny for words. There's another cliche. What I think you're trying to say, and it'd be much clearer, would be you're an extremely funny person. And the last example of a cliche, as luck would have it, I arrived just before my boss. It would be better to word it like this. I was very lucky to arrive at work just seconds before my boss. Much more effective. So try to avoid cliches whenever possible. Okay, next is jargon. Now, what is jargon? What does it mean? And I've given you examples. Jargon is a special kind of cliche, and it's made up of technical words or phrases. And these words or phrases are frequently used within a small group. It might be technical word, they might be technical words, they might be words specific to a particular profession. So they're used in sports, science, trades, and certainly some professions. The jargon in some professions becomes so specialized or technical, it's almost like a private language within your own group, within your own profession. So jargon is frequently only understood by people who are in your field or your trade. So therefore, if you use jargon, you restrict your audience, and therefore you are not appealing to such a wide audience. Your audience becomes very narrow because a lot of people do not understand the language that you're using when you speak using jargon. Now, I've included some examples of jargon. Jargon is often used in the advertising industry, and here are some expressions: focus group, bait and switch, push strategy. Other examples of jargon are used to describe managers, bad managers in the business world, such as playing by the numbers, use of denial, buck passing, abdication, and delaying. So if you're not in that field of work, you may not understand what some of these expressions mean in the business world when you're referring to bad managers. And the last one that I've given you are examples of business jargon, such as bang for the buck, rifle approach, sweat equity, and learning curve. So be careful when you're using jargon. It's fine within your own group, your own setting, your own profession, but you need to be careful in which settings you use jargon. Another use of language is slang. And this slang, I want to talk about what it is and when you should avoid the use of slang. Slang, another term for it is street talk. We use slang expressions in everyday conversation, and that's fine in everyday conversation because it can add color, spice, sometimes surprise to your words. However, in writing or in a formal setting, in a business setting, if you're writing a business letter, if you're going for a job interview, you want to eliminate the use of slang because it's filled with overworked expressions. They're expressions that become repetitive, and they also can eliminate some fine distinctions that you're trying to make to impart in your meaning, the thought that you're trying to convey. So I have listed reasons why slang should not be used in formal writing. 1. The first point is slang expressions, they go out of fashion very quickly. And once they become outdated, which can sometimes happen very fast, they sound silly. They sound so dated that they're no longer in style anymore. So words like far out, groovy, cool, they're not in style anymore. Some of those words date back to the 60s, so you just wouldn't want to use them. Some people may not understand the expressions you're using, or they might be offended because they don't understand the slang words. Also, you may not be including specific and clear details that you might need to communicate your thoughts more effectively in writing, and slang won't allow for that. Another point is slang tends to be a very private language, and it can be exclusive to particular groups. So slang is not aimed at a wide audience. It's not aimed the same way at the general reader. And the last reason I've included as to why slang should not be included in formal writing is it's a characteristic of oral and verbal language, so it's really not appropriate to use it in formal writing. such as academic writing, professional writing, business writing, you would try to avoid it. Now, I've given you a few examples of slang. There are many, many, many examples, but I've just given you a few. The first one, the way you eat really grosses me out. That's slang. In other words, it makes me sick. I don't enjoy watching you eat. My mother always tries to lay a guilt trip on me. Lay a guilt trip to make me feel guilty. I only have $5 to last me for the week. You should say $5. The kids are fighting once again. In formal writing, you don't use kids. You say the children, the young ones. 3 cops. Cops is slang. We're directing traffic at the intersection. You'd say police officers. He is a really impressive dude. That's become outdated. We are just chilling at my house. Or hanging out, that's also slang. And he thinks he's the cat's pajamas. So these are all slang expressions. So how do you avoid slang, you might say? Well, what you should do is look up your word in the dictionary for one. The dictionary should tell you, if you're using a good dictionary, if the word is slang. If it's not in the dictionary, then it may be a new slang term, and then you should definitely not use it in formal writing. Writing well and choosing your words carefully have 2 purposes. They will impress your reader, for one, and they leave a lasting impression, and it will win the respect of your audience, what you say. So another type of language that you want to avoid is sexist language. Now, what is sexist language? It's also known as gender-based language. It's language that excludes either men or women when you're talking about a particular topic, when you want to refer to both sexes, but you're eliminating or excluding one of the sexes. It includes the use of words that signify a particular gender. They're only referring to either males or females. It's not all inclusive. Here are some examples. Actress is female, waitress, mailman, congressman, fireman. So another common error that shows gender bias in language is assuming that the subject of the sentence is a male. So here's an example. Each student chose his topic for his seminar. Now, this sentence, when you read it, the reader would assume that all the students in the class are male. But the probability is that there are females in the class as well. So you would want to be careful of writing in this way. And why should you avoid sexist language? Well, let's look at reasons. Gender-based language offends people when they feel that they're being excluded. You want to be all-inclusive in your writing. If you're offending people, you're not reaching out to an audience. People are shutting down right away. People won't be receptive to your arguments if you are writing using sexist language, gender-based language. And sexist language also encourages discrimination, and it can be quite offensive. So here are a couple of examples of sexist language, and then I've turned it into gender-inclusive language. So stewardess, instead of saying stewardess, you'd say a flight attendant. A fireman, you'd say a firefighter, includes male and female. And housewife, you would just call a housewife a homemaker. So how do you avoid sexist language? That's might be a question. What do you do to avoid it? Well, here are some pointers on what you can do. First of all, avoid terms for professions that are gender specific. So instead of saying policeman, say police officer. Instead of saying fireman, say firefighter. Instead of referring to mankind, this is the second point, use the term humanity, not mankind. Instead of using the word man, say a person, an individual, people. Don't just refer to males. Another pointer is to avoid gender modifiers that assume that certain professions belong to one gender, such as saying she's a female doctor or he's a male nurse. Avoid that. Another point in sexist language, something else to help you so that you don't write in using sexist gender-based language, is rewrite your sentences in the plural so you can avoid gendered pronouns and possessive adjectives. So let's look at a couple of examples. Each manager has his own set of rules and expectations. Well, this is gender bias because you're assuming that each manager is a male by saying his. So why not change it and say all managers, so it's all encompassing, all managers have their own sets of rules and expectations. And now this is now gender neutral. And E, the next point, the fifth point, if you're not able to rewrite your sentence in the plural, then I suggest you use he or she in your sentence so that you're all inclusive. You should always avoid using he or him to refer to both genders. So look at this example. The top student will get his award. You're assuming that the top student is a male, and if you don't know that, it becomes gender bias. Whereas why not say the top student will get his or her award from the main office, and now it becomes gender neutral. You're not just referring to one gender. Another example, if a student studies hard, he will succeed. So this is gender bias. You're referring to he. Two ways to correct it. One, if a student studies hard, he or she will succeed. Now it's gender neutral. Or you could say, just pluralize it and say students who study hard will succeed. And this is also gender neutral. And one final example of how to correct gender-based sexist language. As a teacher, he faces excessive marking of daily papers. Now, if you knew that you were just referring to one male, then that would be fine to say he. But if you're just talking about a teacher in general, and you're saying as a teacher he has a lot of excessive marking, that becomes gender bias. So instead, just talk about teachers in general. As teachers, we face excessive marking daily, and that becomes gender neutral. And the last thing I want to point out is the use of offensive language. You always want to be sure that you do not offend your reader. And some words that you use in everyday speech are not acceptable in formal writing. So, for example, if you're writing a letter of complaint, you want to be professional, you want to be courteous, meaning polite, you want to be articulate. So you want to choose your words carefully. So always avoid the use of swear words, particularly in written messages, because offensive language may sometimes be even worse in writing when you put them in words and expressions than when you utter them verbally. And racist language and profanity are never acceptable. So remember, and I always tell my students, the power of language is strong, so you should always choose your words carefully and wisely. And a last point to remember is that you cannot retract any written words or comments. Once something is in writing, it's there permanently. So if you write something down in a letter, if you write something in an email, it's there permanently, whereas at least in speech you can rectify what you say, you can apologize, you can clarify. So avoid any kind of offensive language, particularly when you're writing formally. So I'm going to stop the video here. These are a few really good pointers on how to improve your language, your choice of words. Please stay tuned for part 2 of improving your language and your choice of words, the way you express yourself, and I'll be going over more rules with examples. Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.